Well, what do you know? It's Monday again, and I am posting late Monday as usual. I keep on thinking that one of these days I might actually get a post out in the morning, but so far it hasn't happened yet. So, but better late than never. Anyway, the question I'm going to address today, I decided to address because um, abuse and rape were the crux of my eating disorder and the one thing that kept me from recovering until I started dealing with those issues. Those were really the core of the issue. Um, and that may or may not be true for everybody, but for a lot of people, I think that is abuse issues. And for me, especially, I tied in basically because of my own abusive passing background and some of the attitudes around body size and body fat that I not only heard as a child but also somehow connected that to abuse. Basically, my distorted thinking was that the weight that there were two ways that I carried it around, and both were on extreme ends, and both happened at different times in my life. So at some points I was overweight, and it was almost like the fat that I carried on me was a protection from and a control thing from the abuse and the comments of people who are overweight being less worth and less value to society. And I think subconsciously, me trying to prove that being overweight I could still accomplish a lot of things, and I did. Problem is, it was all subconscious, and even when I was not, at times when I was really not using my eating disorder to try and lose weight, I couldn't, even eating healthy, I could never lose the weight at all, and I think it was all tied into emotion. Now, on the other extreme, it was like in my head, I could either be overweight and eating, or I could be thin, but I had to be doing extreme eating disorder things in order to lose weight. Otherwise, I couldn't be thin, and really it was like that. I was either really eating disordered and thin, or I was eating disordered in other ways, or thought disordered and overweight, and not really because I was binging. I was under a lot of stress, and so times I may have been overeating or eating the wrong kinds of food. Have the life of a midwife is really high stress, and then especially when I've been particularly busy with births and running everywhere. Sometimes that diet goes by the wayside, but I think more than anything, it was that I held on to that weight because of the abuse issues. And then when I severely relapsed, it was also because of the abuse issues. And I could not climb out of that hole until I started to face the issues behind it. And that was very, very difficult because part of the reason why was because as a teenager I had had an abusive therapist who had not addressed my eating disorder, but instead created more issues because of his agenda and things he planted in my head. And it actually created more confusing issues with abuse because he was planting things in my head and mixing it with real events that had happened, and it made it so that I went through years of denial and thinking that none of this even happened because he made it all up, and he made me think I was crazy, and he isolated me, and basically he brainwashed me as a teenager. And so I had that going on, and that made it very difficult to face abuse issues or to even feel safe in therapy facing abuse issues and to get to a real emotional level. I went through probably 18 months to 2 years of therapy with a different therapist before I found an eating disorder therapist, because although he helped me with some of the issues I was facing, he did not understand eating disorders, actually made my eating disorder worse because he didn't know how to handle it and said things that were triggering and was very judgmental towards me with my eating disorder. But also with him, I think I couldn't get to an emotional level. I could intellectualize, I could talk about things on an intellectual level, but I was always up here protecting myself from the emotions and protecting myself from feeling like I was vulnerable or any, I came across as very professional to him. I didn't want to, and very well spoken. And I think because of that, he missed some of the signs of what was really going on in my head because I put on a really good front and really good presentation. But because of that, my eating disorder was able to get out of control, and I got to a point where I really probably needed inpatient care. I was lucky to have a team that was willing to work with me to a point, but it was really touch and go. I mean, I was really pretty close to just needing to be inpatient because I was so sick, and I was so starving my body and losing weight so rapidly. But when I finally found the therapist that I eventually worked with my eating disorder, it wasn't until then that I was able to start very slowly getting in touch with those issues, and really that's where we took it. We didn't ignore the eating disorder, but instead of faulting me for my eating disorder, she validated me in what my eating disorder was doing for me and the grief that I was feeling, and letting it go because it was such a protection and such, a friend in protecting me from those raw, horrible feelings and memories and, just horrible things that I was feeling that I felt like were going to kill me because I didn't feel safe. Now, eventually, what happened was I did a ton of journaling. Journaling is what worked for me. I didn't always feel safe writing or talking things and being able to express emotion, talking, but I can write, and when I write, I can just, things flow, and we worked out so that I would actually email it to her, and and they were just raw feelings, and the thing that did for me is I would write things, and almost on a daily basis, I would just write journal entries, and I would email them, and my thought was I didn't really care if she read all of them, and she actually did read pretty much all of them, which I didn't expect her to because it was a lot of writing because I write a lot. But it created a sense that, okay, someone knows what I'm going through, and I'm also being accountable at the same time. And so just the fact that, I'm not alone in this process, and I finally feel like there's somebody that I can feel safe with in discussing these things and feeling these emotions. Eventually, I was able to slowly start to work on feeling them, and it didn't start out fast. I mean, it was every once in a while, I used my eating disorder to cope, but sometimes I would feel the feelings and not use my eating disorder to cope. And eventually, I began to feel the feelings more and use my eating disorder less, and when I was able to feel the feelings and realize that the emotion felt bad, felt intense, but eventually it hit a peak, and then I felt better, and then I would feel bad again about something else, and then it would hit a peak, and then I'd feel better, and eventually those emotions started to work out and work themselves out to a point where now I can talk about it. I was never able to talk about what happened with the other therapist. It was a horrible experience, but I felt like it was my fault, and so I had never really opened up about it before I started back in treatment later as an adult. And then that was a huge part of it, was confronting that. We actually confronted him in person together, and that was a pivotal moment to see that I was not the one responsible for that. It was a 15, 16-year-old, vulnerable anyway, and vulnerable to suggestion, and he really manipulated me in a lot of ways. So working through those was just pivotal, and I was not able to even improve in recovery until I started looking and facing those issues. But I had to be at a place where I was safe, where I had a safe team, people that I felt like I could trust, and where I had a network of friends and family to support me. And if you don't have that network, social support groups, therapy groups, whatever you do, you need that network of support. But until you start looking at those issues, those core issues, because, to me, fat meant abuse, and so I abhorred fat, and what I was really trying to get rid of was not fat, but get rid of the abuse issues, get rid of that little girl, get rid of that little part of myself that I thought was horrible by losing the fat. And once I realized and was able to separate that, my fat, my body has nothing to do with abuse, and it's not even related, that's when I was able to start getting better. So, and it took a long time. It's taken years. So give yourself time and give yourself credit.